This just in. Herbie rides again? Alright, so I remember this being a different movie than it was, I think. I remember that. Okay, so I remember thinking that the 4 original Herbie movies were all good. The first one being great, the other ones being rated from good to okay, and then the 97 one being alright as well. But the only one I didn't really like being the Lindsay Lohan one. Now, with Herbie Rides Again, I like it, but it feels like this should have been the 4th film, not the 2nd one. You know what I mean? Like, they go... You know what I mean by this? Like, you take a franchise in one direction, and you slowly lean towards that. But this feels like it's the end, but only put second instead of last. What do I mean by that? Well, we have Willoughby Whitford, played by the late great Ken Berry, may he rest in peace. You know, from Mama's House, is what it's called, right? With the lady from the Carol Burnett show, Vicki Lawrence, Mama's House, right? I think so. He's in this, and he plays the nephew of a greedy real estate tycoon, Alonzo Hawk, who was the villain in The Absent-Minded Professor and its sequel, Son of Flubber. And they reuse him here. And he's a great villain, don't get me wrong. He's a great villain. But he's not David Tomlinson. He's not the Thorndike. You compare the two, and he's a little over the top. Well, Thorndike had his over the topness with the yelling, but that's David Tomlinson's classic yelling. Here, he's over the top in a whole different way. He's a real estate tycoon who wants to build this Hawk Plaza. And to finish it, he has to bulldoze the firehouse from the first film, where the characters of Jim Douglas and Tennessee Steinmetz lived. Now, Tennessee's aunt, Mrs. Steinmetz, lives in this firehouse. And she also has a neighbor named Nicole, played by Stephanie. Oh, man. I had it. No. Stephanie Powers. And Helen Hayes plays Mrs. Steinmetz. And I like... The characters in this film are good. But the one thing that's very distracting for me is the fact that it's very obvious that Stephanie Powers is wearing a wig. It's so freaking obvious that most of the time I'm watching this movie, I'm sitting there going, it's a wig. It's a wig. It's a wig. Or it is like, man, that wig looks terrible. There's times she wears a hat to try to cover up and make it look better, but maybe it's only for certain parts of the movie. Maybe they... sometimes they don't film movies in the same order most of the time. So maybe in some scenes they were trying to cover it up, but then dropped it, but didn't reshoot those scenes, so now you got some with the hats trying to cover it up. I don't know. But that's not the worst thing in this film. The wig is not the worst thing. It's the fact... Okay, so like I said, you go from the first film, and this feels like something that should be put in to like the 4th film or something. So the whole big thing with the first film was that Herbie was actually alive. And they drew big attention to this. Like it's something never thought before. Only Tennessee was the only one that, really heard of it before. But it's just a whole big thing. Here you got not only Herbie is alive, but the woman... Mrs. Steinmetz has a organ thing that's alive, as well as a rail car, whatever it's called. Like the San Francisco that had those things. It's one of those. They put them to good use. But that's not the worst they do with this concept. So, when I get to the climax, let's talk about Hawk's dream. Alright, so this whole thing, it's a battle between Mrs. Steinmetz and Alonzo Hawk. Alonzo Hawk sends his nephew, because he's a nice guy, and maybe this nice guy can coerce Mrs. Steinmetz to sell the place. It doesn't work, and he ends up turning on his uncle because of the nice old lady and the woman. He falls in love with the woman, of course. We'll get to that cliche at the end of this review, but at the end of the movie, and yeah. And so he joins forces with the good guys, which is good. And it seems easier for him to believe that Herbie's alive over Jim Douglas. Jim Douglas takes most of the film, like 3/4 of the first film, to finally realize that Herbie's alive. Where Wilby just is like, eventually, like maybe half the film, he realizes that it's alive, if even. You know? And so it's this kind of war between the two going back and forth. Eventually this leads to Mrs. Steinmetz coming up with a plan. They have Wilby pretend to be Ian Hawk. Not Ian Hawk. This is not Alvin and the Chipmunks. Pretend to be Mr. Hawk. And he has this demolition guy he's going to have destroy the firehouse. But they come up with this plan, and they have Wilby pretending Mr. Hawk, and the address they give him is Mr. Hawk's address. He bulldozes the side of the house, and supposedly this gets Mr. Hawk to change his mind. But before this, Mr. Hawk is having a dream. He's having trouble sleeping, so he calls someone. The guy tells him to count sheep. So he started counting sheep. But each sheep has the letter 53 on it, because Herbie. And then they turn into monstrous versions of Herbie with teeth. I'm watching this, and that Herbie jumps around, and I go, ah, Jesus. That's not all. They are chasing him around, and then all of a sudden he's on the Empire State Building, and he's King Kong, and he's swinging away at flying Herbies around him. And then the thing comes crashing through. He admits defeat, but it's a scam, eventually, they're able to take care of Mr. Hawk one way or another. Because, here we go. Before this, though, I want to talk about the scene in which they are being chased by Mr. Hawk's men. And they're in a rail car going up. This drunk man, Mr. Judson, gets on, and he has this nice conversation with Mrs. Steinmetz. But the thing is, he's spewing out this drunk mumbo jumbo, and she's sitting there just knitting, going, as he's talking, you nerds. Mm-hmm. And he's thinking, okay, this drunk guy, he's one thing. But he comes back later. She sets up Wilby and Nicole on a date. And then, well, you know, she's having a date with Judson. She always talks about her late husband. She has respect for her late husband, but, you know, you gotta move on. And he's there when Hawks tries to invade. Herbie goes to get help, goes to get Nicole and Wilby to save the day, and that's when because, you know, they get in Herbie, he does this, I'm like, yeah! And then other Volkswagen Beetles come to life and form an army. Excuse me, this is for you. Why? Like I said, that's what I'm saying. These living things should be something in a fourth film, not a second one. It goes way too far with this concept. And it ruined the film for me. It ruined the climax. This would have been good had you actually done something else. Anything else. But this other cars coming to life, it doesn't make sense. Especially when and we'll get to it with the 97 film, but when they explain in that film why Herbie is alive, it doesn't make sense with the rest of these inanimate objects coming to life. I know that Tennessee said in the first one that, You know, that anything can do it if you believe, or something like this. Some kind of mumbo jumbo. Like, everything has a heart. Everything can come to life, you know, if it has true enough heart. But we get an explanation as to what it is in the 97 film. And I like that better than just, oh, anything can do it. And this is my final thing that really ruins the film. Like Mrs. Steinmetz is talking to Nicole about marrying Wilby. I'm like, you know each other for 5 minutes. That's not going to happen. They get married at the end of this film. Look, I understand it's Disney. You got happily ever after. In cartoons, it works. But they've known each other for about the same time, maybe even less time, than Jim and the other lady, I don't remember her name, knew each other in the first one. And yet they're getting married at the end. With freaking Volkswagen, alive Volkswagen's doing the thing. It's ridiculous. But I digress. This movie, it's entertaining for the kids, but for me, it leaves a little to desire. I'm going to give it a 7. At least it's decent. It's not the worst in this, I don't think, but it's decent. So what are your thoughts on Herbie Rides Again? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I've been Scotty. See you in the next one.